So, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Voices of Change, a discussion on juvenile justice reform in the state of Maryland. My name is Sabria Hassan Ismail, and I'm the Director of Programs at the Banneker-Douglass-Tubman Museum. We're honored to have you here with us as we engage in this important conversation about the future of juvenile justice. But before we would begin, I would like to take a brief moment to honor the late, great poet, advocate, just all around phenomenal woman, Miss Nikki Giovanni, whose words have inspired so many. As she once said, "We love because it's the only true adventure." Let us carry her spirit of love and courage into our conversation this evening. Following the moderated portion of our program, we will open the floor to questions from the audience. Please feel free to leave any questions you may have in the chat throughout the event, as we'll be monitoring the chat. I also encourage you to use the chat to engage respectfully with one another as we share our thoughts and insights. Finally, I would be remiss if I didn't take a moment to express my gratitude to the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture, as well as the Banneker-Douglass Museum Foundation, for their invaluable support of programs like the one we have the pleasure of presenting tonight. Now it is my distinct honor to hand the mic over to our Executive Director, Chanel Johnson, who will guide us through this evening's program. Thank you.
Now, I can't, thank you, Sabria. I can't see or hear everyone, but could we give a virtual round of applause to our program's director, Sabria Hassan Ismail, and really to all of you for joining us here tonight. Thank you, Sabria. Tonight we gather at a pivotal moment in Maryland's history. As we commemorate Maryland's Year of Civil Rights in 2024, marking the 60th anniversary of the landmark 1964 Civil Rights Act, we are convening a critical dialogue about a deeply profound issue on racial equity and civil rights in our state: juvenile justice. This program emerges from our reflections on last year's legislative session, which brought into sharp focus, particularly in mainstream media, juvenile justice reform in our state. Tonight, we will explore the complex historical roots of our juvenile justice system in Maryland, tracing its origins in systemic racism and anti-Black laws, and imagine a path forward towards racial equity for Black youth. Our distinct speakers represent thought leaders in social activism and African American historic preservation. Each will offer a unique perspective on juvenile justice, helping us unpack its historical context, its current state, and possible future. Through their insights, we aim to illuminate the systemic challenges and potential transformative approaches that we can reshape how we support and protect Black youth in our state. This program was made possible by the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture and the Banneker-Douglass Museum Foundation. And I'd like to give a special shout out to our incredible staff at the Banneker-Douglass-Tubman Museum, Jan Lee, our marketing director in communications, who's here with us tonight, Sabria Hassan Ismail, who you saw earlier tonight in tonight's program, Abiola Akintola, our education coordinator who manages our after-school programming right here in the city of Annapolis, and all of you, and to our commission chair, Maya Davis, who not only chairs the commission, but you will hear from her tonight as a historic preservationist. This program is made possible by all of you and all of your support. So thank you. So now, without further ado, I'm honored to introduce our first speaker, Chris Haley. Chris Haley is an actor, writer, filmmaker, and director of research, education, and outreach, and the Legacy of Slavery program in Maryland at the Maryland State Archives. Chris is also runs the Utopia Film Festival. He is thrilled to link the two main pursuits of his life together: history and the arts. He is co-director of the Capital Region Emmy-nominated documentary Unmarked on the state of often unknown and under-supported burial sites of free and enslaved African Americans. He was named the 2021 Anne Arundel Arts Council Literary Arts Award recipient for his many writings, including the poetry collections Until the Right One Comes Along, and Obsessions, and Fists and Rainbows, and Your Buddy. He is currently the narrator and host of the podcast, The People's Recorder, produced by Spark Media on the 1930s Federal Writers Project. He is the 2024 Society of American Archivists, SAA, Diversity Award, and the American Association of State and Local History, ASALH, Lifetime Achievement Award recipient. In the 2023 National Park Service Network to Freedom Robert G. Stanton and the Wilbur H. Seibert Award recipient. Chris, you got a lot of awards. He has founded the Underground Railroad Legacy of Slavery Research Program at the Maryland State Archives in 2001. The project has produced online access to over 400,000 entries related to the lives of free and enslaved African Americans who lived before, during, and after the Civil War. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Chris Haley.
Thank you so much, Director Johnson. Just so you all know that I'm in a room which has time-sensitive lighting. So every now and then it may go off and I will have to do this crazy wave thing. So you don't think I'm like going off or there's a fly or a bee in the room, just so you know. I've done it twice already and I thought it was going to be okay, but then it became blurry. So now I know I'm going to have to do that. So thank you very much, Banneker-Douglass-Tubman Museum. And it's an honor and a privilege to be a part of this panel with such distinguished guests and colleagues. And certainly I've known you all for a while. Maya Davis is someone I love and cherish. She's been a colleague of mine for many, many, many years. And many times she was the one who would say, Chris, that isn't right. Or Chris, no, that's okay. Okay, let's go with that. I mean, it's just like, it would remind me of so many things that I probably have forgotten. So it truly is a joy to be here today. What I'm going to try to do is share my screen for all of my presentation, just to give you an idea of what I have used and what, generally speaking, at the archives, what we try to base most of our, if not all of our presentations on, is primary source documents or facts that we've aggregated or accumulated from primary source documents. So with that, I'm going to go into something which isn't my forte, which is the digital world. So share screen at this point and click here. Okay, so now I'm going to do that question we always, can you hear me? Can you see my screen? Okay, great.
You are good.
Excellent. All right. Well, this is something that we have on the Maryland State Archives website, the Legacy of Slavery Program, which is by virtue of the University of Virginia Historical Census Browser. That's what this site is that has been formatted to be viewable within the Maryland State Archives Legacy of Slavery Program. The sense of what I'm trying to show you right now is at its base to remind people who are watching us tonight, this evening, that regardless of what the statistics show, from the beginning of colonization in Maryland to present day in the state, the amount of persons here is primarily statistically European. So white Americans, white Marylanders, and others, and also Black Marylanders. But also to show that within that same time frame, many Black Marylanders were also free. They were not always enslaved. And as the years go by, some of the laws that I'll go into just very briefly will start to, I think, suggest what we all know is a fact, that mass incarceration is not something that happened overnight. It's something that was gradually incorporated and codified through the Maryland General Assembly through the years, a practice which we believe is truly mirrored throughout the United States of America. So the red indicates what we're on right now. This is a chart for the 1810 federal census results. And I just want to bring you briefly down to the bottom where it indicates that the total free persons in the state of Maryland in 1810 were 269,044. All other free persons, which would include free persons of color, Black people, would be 33,927. Enslaved, 111,502. So roughly a little bit more than a third of the population of the state of Maryland in 1810 was filled with enslaved individuals. However, there was still about 10% that were free. So the next year I want to go to is 1860, the advent of the Civil War. So looking here, again, let's go to the bottom of the columns. And you see the different columns here: Black males, free Black females, free Blacks, total population, total enslaved population. So the total population, this column right here, 687,049. Enslaved population. And remember, in Maryland, as in all the states in the United States of America, only people of color, only Black people were enslaved. There were others who could have been indentured, such as white, such as Indians, but only Black people were ever enslaved in the United States of America. 87,189. Free Black population at the advent of the Civil War, 83,942. So roughly a 50-50 percentage between Black people who were enslaved and Black people who were free. However, still not the huge amount comparatively to the entire population of the state of Maryland. And now I want to go to 1880. 1880, total population, the state of Maryland, 934,943. White persons, 724,693. Colored persons, that's the term that was used then, 210,230. So one could say roughly a third, a little less than a third of the population in the state of Maryland were Black people. So just to give you a background of the population writ large we're dealing with. Now from that, what I'm going to go to is another chart that I have here. I think I don't want to do that one yet. I want to, this will move up, move, please move. Let me see if I can move this over. I'm gonna have to click on that so I can get to the other one. When I was doing this before, it moved out of my way. Of course, now it's not moving out of my way. So, all right, so I'm going to do this first since it's not moving out of my way. These are some laws that we have. This is, okay, now I'm going to do my wave now. Okay, I didn't do it. Okay, now see the wonderful lighting now? Okay, great. So some of these laws are from the archives of Maryland. These laws specifically refer to either indentured servitude or free Blacks and enslaved Blacks through the time that I just shared with you. So 1814, remember I did show you the comparable amount of individuals who were both free and enslaved in Maryland at that time. These are some of the laws that became codified, that started setting in motion the situation that we still see ourselves in today. And specifically, not only for adult Black people, but also youth. And again, we're talking about the voices of change, talking specifically about young persons of color today. This law in 1814, be it enacted by the General Assembly of Maryland, that the inspector of the penitentiary of this state, or any three of them, shall have the power to bind as apprentices the free male convicts whose times of labor in that institution shall expire before they are of age. And they are further empowered in their discretion to bind an apprentice until the age of 16 years. Any free female convict whose term of service shall be ended before they have attained that age, and also to bind as apprentices the children of female convicts born during their time of service, the males until 21 years of age, females until 16 years of age. Now, this could be for Black people as well as white people, but the key here is to know that in any case, whatever race they are, it's already set in place here that as a child, as a youth, as a young teenager, and with your children, you could be bound to service early in your lifetime for the beginning of your adulthood. In 1831, an act relating to the people of color in this state, and specifically, as you see here, an act relating to free Negroes and slaves. In 1831, to remind those who may or may not know, was around the time of the Maryland Colonization Society Act, which was an act that was put forth specifically to try to, one could say, contain, restrict the activities, and one could even say the prevalence of free Blacks in the state of Maryland, as I again showed you in the earlier census chart, to show that there was a growing number of free Blacks as well as enslaved Black people in the state of Maryland. And now I'm going to click on the actual law here. I think it will come up. Yes, that's it. An act relating to free Negroes and slaves, Section 1. Be it enacted by the General Assembly of Maryland that after the passage of this act, no free Negro or mulatto shall immigrate to or settle in this state, and no free Negro or free mulatto belonging to any other state, district, or territory shall come into this state and therein remain for the space of 10 successive days, wherein such free Negro or mulatto intends settling in the state or not, under the penalty of $50 for each and every week such person coming into shall thereafter remain in the state, the one half to the informer, the other half to the sheriff, for the use of the county, to be recovered on complaint and conviction before a justice of the peace of the county, in which he shall be arrested, and any free Negro or mulatto refusing or neglecting to pay said fine or fines shall be committed to the jail of the county and shall be sold by the sheriff at public auction. Basically, this is saying that if you are a free Black and you have immigrated into the state, you're going to have to pay a fine in order to stay here. Otherwise, you can be jailed, you will be fined, and if you are not able to pay the fine, then after a certain amount of time, you could be sold into slavery. That's in 1831. Back to the general laws here. An act concerning crimes and punishments, 1835, prescribes punishments for destroying property or entering property with the intent to harm. Free Black people, if convicted, sentenced to imprisonment in the penitentiary for repeat offenders, to be sold out of state for a term of years. So remember, as you're seeing this, and as I tried to show you in the earlier census records, there is a growing amount of free Black population subsequent to the American Revolution, subsequent to census records, which showed that after what was called certificates of freedom for those who were born free, such as Benjamin Banneker, or those who were freed, such as other individuals by will or by their person who was their father or their mother or just their owner who may have freed them, that population is such that Maryland says we've got to do something with this growing, as they often refer to, this growing annoyance of free Blacks in our state because they are not considered equal. 1839, an act to provide for the better regulation of the free Negro and mulatto children within the state, that from and after the passage of this act, the Orphans' Court of any county in this state, upon information being given to either of said courts, shall summon before them the child or children of any free Negro or Negroes or mulattoes in said county, and if it shall appear upon examination before such court that it would be better for the habits and comfort of such child or children that it should be bound as an apprentice to some white person to learn, to labor, then such court shall bind as apprentices such child or children to some white person, males till they are 21 years of age and females till they are 16 years of age. So this is again speaking about persons who are free, that a court can decide if they can or cannot take care of their child, and not by the point of view or by the opinion of that parent, but by the court, shall decide that that free Negro or mulatto child can be put into indentured servitude, which is literally the equivalent to slavery, except there would be or should be an end date to it. 1845, an additional supplement to the act relating to the Maryland Penitentiary passed at December session 1837, chapter 320, and be it enacted that the directors aforesaid may, in their discretion, allow female convicts to bring with them into the penitentiary their infant children, and that the said directors shall have the power, and they are hereby authorized, to bind such children as apprentices, binding the males till they are 21 and the females till they are 18 years of age. So again, restricting the freedom that Black individuals may have, whether or not they're struggling, but still the court has the right to decide what happens not only to that parent, but to their child for an amount of time at which arguably they are able to fend for themselves. 21 for males, 18 for children. A supplement to the act entitled An Act to Provide for the Better Regulation of the Free Negro and Mulatto Children within this state, passed 1846. And we're even getting into the time of the tension leading up to the Civil War, where there's more stress about what do we do with these Northerners who want to end slavery, because that's how we thrive. Many slave owners in Maryland thrive. Many slave owners across the United States of America and the South were striving at this point still. Specifically, that hereafter, when information shall be given to any constable or justice of the peace that there are in the election district where such constable or justice of the peace resides, any child or children of any free Negro or mulatto who ought to be bound out as apprentices, it shall be the duty of such constable or justice of the peace forthwith to give notice to the person or persons having the custody of such child or children that they must be bound out as apprentices. And let me say that again. It shall be the duty of such constable or justice of the peace forthwith to give notice to the person or persons having custody of the such child or children that they must be bound out as apprentices. So in other words, if this is a generous or a beneficent person who feels like this isn't right, it is there by law that they must do this. They must have this child bound into indentured servitude who is otherwise a free Black person. Now, what I will show next, if I can get to it, okay, 1870. So this is after the Civil War. This is after all Black people are free. And then there's also a house of refuge that has been created along the lines of what we're talking about with the Maryland Penitentiary. And within this program, the light's getting ready to go out, just so you know, that the managers of the House of Reformation and Instruction shall have the power to bind out the children committed to their care with the consent of such children as apprentices during their minority, that is to say, males until the age of 21 years and the females until the age of 18 years to such persons and places, whether in and out of the state, and to learn such proper trades or employments as in the judgment of the said managers will be most conducive to the reformation and the future benefit and advantage of such children. And the indentures by which such children shall be bound shall contain the covenants and shall be recorded as prescribed by Article 6 of the Code, and all provisions of the said article in relation to white apprentices shall apply to apprentices bound under this section. Basically, what this is saying, again, leading us into what we're talking about today overall, is that in their youth, young people of African descent were being judged, were being, one could say, even colonized into a penal, into a restrictive organization where they are only allowed to even survive if they consent to being managed, to be bound to being taught under the court, under the state court's beneficence, so to speak, to do as they say, after which time they could be freed. And I believe this is back in the 19th century, the mid-19th century, even after slavery is officially over, that these are the steps that put us toward the path that we're on today, where mass incarceration is almost taken for granted that that's what it is. And what I wanted to show you, that it started so far back that it will probably take more than just recounting these laws to have it eliminated. So within that, I would just share that at the archives, with the help of some volunteers and some interns, we have begun a program where we are looking at the original ledgers of the Maryland Penitentiary to get all the different entries of all individuals, white or Black, to be able to specifically judge the data, calculate the data to show how many people of color were arrested, what the charges were against them, what the punishments which were levied against them, were they of equal amount? Were they more punitive than to their white counterparts? And also, to what degree and when did the mass incarceration or the disproportionate incarceration start to take shape? And generally speaking, it starts to take shape around the end of the Civil War, as we might imagine it would, because then you can't have people who are enslaved whose productivity would be taken away from their owner. Now it's people who are free, who you're trying to manage their freedom and keep them from taking away the jobs of other whites who are in the area. So with that, I will yield my sharing screen back to Director Johnson.
Chris Haley, thank you so much for that compelling data and historical content. I think just that list of laws that you shared, I think that's a powerful advocacy tool. And I just want to say, on behalf of our museum, our commission, and I'm going to speak for the folks in the room, thank you for all the work that you're doing at the archives to make this information accessible, that really will have positive impact in our state. And so thank you for all of your work that you're doing, your groundbreaking work that you're doing. So on to our next speaker. Dayvon Love is a Baltimore-based political organizer and the Director of Public Policy for Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle, LBS, a grassroots think tank that advances the public policy interests of Black people. In 2010, Love co-founded Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle, one of many organizations that have successfully pressured the state of Maryland to disband its plans to build a juvenile jail downtown. I'm assuming in downtown Baltimore. LBS has also led legislative efforts and advocacy efforts regarding criminal justice reform, youth and community empowerment. Dayvon is also the author of Worse Than Trump, The American Plantation. I love that title. A book that offers an important critique of the American political left and a political alternative to the exploitative relationship that Black people have to white institutions. Dayvon is also the author of When Baltimore Awakes, which is a comprehensive critique of the way that white supremacy is embedded in the human/social service sector in Baltimore. Ladies and gentlemen, and everyone in the room, Dayvon Love.
Thank you, Director Johnson. I want to thank the museum for the invitation to present this evening, particularly on this subject. As my bio indicates, a lot of the work that I've done centers around the legislative advocacy and addressing the impact of the criminal justice system and its impact that it's had on our community. So I want to do just a couple of things kind of on the outset. I want to just provide some framing for some of the information that I'm going to provide. And then where I'm going to actually end is on some of the legislative work that is needed to address many of the issues that our community faces in the juvenile justice system, and just provide some insight as to how people can be helpful in advancing some of the work that I'll lay out. So first, what I want to say is that it is hard to overstate the extent to which the weaponization of the criminal juvenile justice system, that the extent to which that damage has been done to our community. There's ways in which the violence that these systems do to our community are normalized. There are ways that, it is different in many instances from the way that the media covers, instances of violence, right, that happen in our community, gun violence in particular. And those things are important. There's a way that too often, when we think about the life-altering impact of contact with the juvenile justice system has on young people and their families, that it's hard to overstate the extent of that damage that is done to our community. And so I just want to frame that as to why this issue is so important. It's not just an academic issue in terms of the racial disparities that exist in the juvenile justice system, but there are real families that are impacted by the nature of how the system operates. Second kind of just major framing that I want to provide is that the societal propaganda of notions of white supremacy, Black inferiority, inherent Black pathology is central to how these systems of juvenile criminal justice impact our community. It is central. So the narratives, whether we're talking about, many of us are familiar with, Birth of a Nation, right? First motion picture film in the United States that portrayed some of these stigmas and stereotypes as the Black brute, the Black rapist, right? These are notions and stereotypes that are drivers of the way in which people of African descent are perceived in the collective American consciousness. So what I want to do is I actually want to provide just a few examples of those kind of societal stigmas and that propaganda, and then connect it to the policies in Maryland as it relates to juvenile justice. So one of the things that I want to start with, there's a book by a gentleman named Howell Bond, a book called Brown in Baltimore. And he documents some of the transition civically and politically when the Brown v. Board of Education decision came down in 1954, what that looked like in Baltimore. He actually documents that when the Brown decision came down, there were letters written by many white parents to the school system about their concerns about integration. And their primary concerns that he documents is white parents' concern about the proximity of Black boys to white girls, right? So it goes to show you, when you think about, again, those societal stigmas that emerged from, I mentioned, Birth of a Nation and many other kinds of stereotypes, those things carried well into the 20th century. Additionally, one of the stigmas and stereotypes that we see, as the war on drugs and mass incarceration start to accelerate, and this is documented in Harriet Washington's book, Medical Apartheid, the notion of the crack baby, right? And I remember reading this book, several years ago, and being surprised at the fact that the notion of a crack baby, and I'm sure many people who, have heard of that term, I'm sure, unfortunately, many of us, when we were kids, made fun of people by using the term, calling people crack babies, right? And when you think about the fact that the term crack baby has no medical basis, there's no such medical designation as a crack baby, right? And what Harriet Washington documents is that there's no substantive medical distinction between a child born to a mother addicted to crack versus a child born to a mother addicted to alcohol or other kinds of drugs, right? So crack baby was a pop culture term that helped to advance the stigmas needed to justify the policies that then that exacerbated mass incarceration, right? So again, just examples of the extent to which these societal stigmas are central to justifying the kinds of policies that produce the challenges that we see with the criminal juvenile justice system. Fast forwarding a bit, there's a study done in 2014, the lead researcher, Philip Goff, called The Essence of Innocence. And that kind of landmark study documents the fact, this notion of adultification, where Black children are usually assessed about 6 to 10 years older than their actual age. And so a part of what that study concludes is that then Black youth are treated like adults, deemed more culpable for their behavior than their white counterparts, and therefore subject to harsher punishment. So I just wanted to start with just laying out the fact that those societal stigmas have real sociological impacts, right, on the systems that operate on our community and that are key to shaping the kind of collective American consciousness that then impact how certain decisions are made. So now I want to transition to talking specifically about Maryland and the state of the juvenile justice system in Maryland. So just generally, Maryland incarcerates the highest percentage of its Black population than any other state in the United States. Maryland subjects more children, a higher per capita percentage of its children to the adult prison system than any other state in the country besides Alabama, in terms of the last data that was available in 2021. So Maryland is among states like Alabama in terms of it incarcerating young people and putting them into the adult system. As of a couple of weeks ago, 81% of the young people who are charged as adults are Black, even though we only make up 31% of the population. Black youth are 2 times more likely to be incarcerated in the juvenile justice system than their white counterparts. So going back as to where I started in the beginning, so we're talking about Black families for whom there are life-altering consequences in engaging the juvenile justice system. Now, what I want to do is start with the fact that when we talk about some of the propaganda that we're seeing in the news media, and I want to reiterate just some thanks to Chanel. We had a conversation months ago wanting to talk about this issue of juvenile justice. And a part of why for me it's important to have this conversation, because there is a political agenda that undergirds much of the mainstream media coverage on the issue of juvenile justice. That if one isn't equipped with the proper information, it'd be easy to miss it. It would be easy to be complicit and condone some of the underlying kind of political agenda that is embedded in some of the coverage around juvenile justice. And so one of the things that you will hear is that those of us that are pushing back against the damage that is being done by the juvenile justice system to our young people, the narrative is that we don't care about punishing kids for harm they commit in the community, right? And one of the things that we have been extremely explicit about is that those of us that advocate for changing the way that the juvenile justice system harms our community, it is not about not punishing people for harm that they commit, right, or holding people accountable. It is about maximizing the opportunity for diverting young people from the system that would be best served outside of the juvenile justice system. And what folks like myself and other advocates are arguing is that many of the young people that are currently in the juvenile justice system will be better served outside of it. So then the question becomes, what are the mechanisms by which young people get sucked into the juvenile justice system who would otherwise be better served outside of it? And so I want to talk about a couple of really specific examples of this. The first is that many of the young people who are currently incarcerated, particularly those charged as adults, and I'm going to talk about you charged as adults, and that's kind of where I'm going to end up. But many of the young people that are charged as adults, their charge has to do with mere gun possession. And I want to talk about gun possession for a second. Because when lawmakers and people in the kind of mainstream media talk about addressing violence, one of the major assumptions is that a young person with a gun automatically indicates a young person that is prone to violence. And we think about the societal stigmas about Black people and about Black youth in particular. The notion that Black people are inherently criminal factor in to the narrative around gun possession. Because people who live in neighborhoods where they know other people possess weapons, one might carry a firearm for protection. And being that we're in a moment now where firearms are way more accessible than they ever were in the history of the world, that it is a rational consideration for a young person to decide that they want to carry a firearm. That doesn't mean that we condone it. That doesn't mean we want young people carrying firearms. But we have to understand that it is a rational decision for a 14-year-old to say that I live in a neighborhood where other people have guns, so I'm going to have a gun for protection, right? The problem with our system is that it treats that young person the same as a young person who genuinely is interested in committing violence against the community. And so this is why it is important to have policies where determinations can be made as to the circumstances of that young person, so that you can determine whether or not this is someone who's, and people who work with young people in the community, you can tell, that, oh, this is a young person that they're not really dangerous, right? Right. They don't know what they're doing. They have no business carrying a gun, but they carry it because they think that they need it, right? Again, a rational choice. So what our system needs to do then is provide alternatives, provide supports, so that young person does not feel the need to carry a firearm, that whatever danger that they feel is addressed as a result of whatever supports are pulled together. So that's one thing that I want to talk about. The other thing that I want to address, as I mentioned, is the automatic charging of youth as adults. This is one of the biggest challenges that we have in our state. Maryland is in the minority of states around the United States that automatically charge youth as adults. There are about 30 charges or so, in which if a young person is charged with it, they're automatically put into the adult system. And what that means is that when a young person is put into the adult system, they don't have access to the supports that comes with being in the juvenile justice system. So they're not guaranteed education. They're not guaranteed mental health services. And in the adult system, when you're charged as an adult, the young person, in terms of supports, there is no presumption that they're entitled to any supports when they are in the adult system. And so currently we have a policy where those 33 charges, which include gun possession, right? So misdemeanor gun possession is one of those charges that if a young person is charged with misdemeanor gun possession, they are automatically put into the adult system. And you have in many cases where young people who are in the adult system, now by law, youth are supposed to be sight and sound away from adults in the facility. What that ends up meaning in many cases is that young people are functionally in solitary confinement in adult facilities. And that can last for several months, right? While they're awaiting their hearing. Now, in many cases, what happens is that their attorney, a public defender or their attorney, would motion to have them waved back down to the juvenile justice system, right? But by then, many of them have already spent significant time in the adult system. And the damage that is done to that young person, that family is already done. So the policies that we're going to be that Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle is going to be advocating for this coming legislative session, which starts in January, will be to end the automatic charging of youth as adults, where every young person would begin in the juvenile justice system. That if a prosecutor decides that that young person needs to be charged as an adult, that they would have to put in a motion to that judge to waive them up to the adult system. One of the things that we find in some of the data is that a majority of the young people that are charged as adults actually end up getting waived back down to the juvenile justice system anyway, right? So if you start them in the juvenile justice system, right, and make it so that they have to be waived up, it protects many young people who needlessly spend time in the adult system and the horrors that come with having a young person in many cases, what functionally serves as solitary confinement. One of the things that I want to end on in talking about just the difficulty. So this is something that has been a legislative effort for many years. And one of the challenges that we have is that when you think about how legislators think about Black people, right? These stigmas that I've been describing and that you'll probably hear a whole lot more about, right? That those stigmas impact the way that people relate to this policy. In other words, the propaganda that I mentioned, St. Clair Broadcasting and a variety of other news outlets who are putting out propaganda around juvenile justice and wanting to roll back some of the protections from juvenile justice. Those rollbacks, the impact that they would have is not that it would make it so young people will be held more accountable. What it would do is it would shrink the capacity to be able to make individualized assessments for each young person so that we can divert young people away from the system. But what has happened is that unfortunately, one of the impacts of living in a society that is currently structured on racism and white supremacy is that prosecutors like Scott Schellenberger of Baltimore County, like Ivan Bates of Baltimore City, like Rich Gibson of Howard County, like State's Attorney McCarthy in Montgomery County, that they have constituencies for whom being able to say that we locked up more Black kids is electorally something that they gain points from. And so one of the things that I want to encourage people to do is that it's going to be important. You know, if you lbsbaltimore.com, LBS Baltimore, and all your relevant social media, we're going to be sending out action alerts and information to the community about reaching out to your elected officials. They need to hear that this is something that is of concern. They need to hear that it'll have electoral consequences if they do not move this policy and allow majority Black youth to continue to be victimized by this system. And we need to do the work of pressing the people in our spheres of influence, because even many of our own people in our own community, unfortunately, have internalized these narratives and stigmas, right? And are okay with allowing our young people to languish, right, in the adult prison system in ways that is harmful to them in their community. And so one of the things that is essential to understand is that unfortunately, people are scoring political points off of being tough on our young people. And so this is one of those efforts where we need to, with a Black governor, with a Black speaker, with the largest Black caucus in the United States, with a Black attorney general, it is important that we end the practice of automatically charging youth as adults, because that practice is a practice that is an extension of the criminalization of young people and the dehumanization of people of African descent in general. So I'll stop there.
Dayvon, thank you for all the work that you're doing for Black youth in our state. It's incredibly meaningful. It has generational impact. If we can put, team, if we can put in the chat the link to Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle, so that folks can know how to support your organization. And so thank you for all of this illuminating information. I think what I'm going to do is, for the sake of time, and there's some really great folks in the room, we got 48 people in the audience. I'm going to bypass my moderated questions because I have access to all y'all and I can talk to y'all not anytime I want to, but we could talk. So what I'm going to ask is, if you have any questions, please put it in the chat portion in the lower panel, and Miss Ismail will read your questions after the presentation. So thank you, Dayvon. All right, to our next speaker, my boss, your African-American historian, Maya Davis. Maya Davis is the director of the Riversdale House Museum. She is also the former 19th century plantation home in Prince George's County, where individuals like Adam Francis Plummer, an enslaved man, as well as the Steer and the Calvert families who own the property. Prior to her arrival, she was a research archivist and legislative liaison at the Maryland State Archives, where she consulted on statewide projects related to the African American experience and facilitated discussions on state legislation and contemplated legislation. Some of her recent projects include the Adam Francis Plummer Portrait Commission, installation of the Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman statue at the Maryland State House, Annapolis Port Marker Project, and the Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad National Park and Visitor Center. Maya is the bomb.com. I just added that. Maya currently serves as the chair of the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture. This commission operates the Banneker-Douglass-Tubman Museum, as well as the African American Heritage Preservation Grant Program. Maya is also a commissioner on the Maryland Lynching Truth and Reconciliation Commission and a board trustee at the Maryland Center for History and Culture in Prince George's County Historical Society. Previously, she served as the interim director of the Banneker-Douglass Museum and staff at the City Museum of Washington, D.C., and vice chair of the Annapolis 1864 Commission to commemorate Maryland Emancipation Day. A native Washingtonian, Maya is a graduate of Howard University and George Washington University, where she obtained degrees in history and museum studies. Ladies and gentlemen, the woman of the hour, Maya Davis.
Thank you so much, Chanel. I will just say it is already tough enough to go behind Chris Haley and Dayvon Love, but Chanel is always hyping me up to everyone, and I only hope that I live up to your expectations. But thank you so much, Chanel. I'm so honored to be here before you. I am going to pull up and share my screen. I have a little quick presentation, nothing too extensive. Let me see. Oh, it's not. It's Sabria, do I need permission to share? I'm sorry. I don't mean to hold up
No
progress.
Well, Jen, can you make Maya a co-host if she's not one already?
Right.
Okay, I think I can share now.
Okay.
All right. Can you see that?
Yes, ma'am.
You say you can? I'm sorry.
Yep, we can see it.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, everybody. Today, I am wearing my commission hat for the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture. And in that capacity of service, I hold a seat on the Maryland Lynching Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which I've been a part of since its inception in 2019. And I'm super excited to kind of talk about some of our work and hope that it'll be enlightening for you. I will first talk about establishing the commission. This was something that started at the grassroots level. An organization called the Maryland Lynching Memorial Project, which is still in existence, actually approached Delegate Joseline Pena-Milnick out of Prince George's County about establishing a bill that would put forth the motion of creating a commission to establish, to discuss lynching in Maryland. And this idea was not a new concept. It was one that was actually put forward by scholar Sherilyn Eiffel, who's done a lot of work with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. And she actually really laid the groundwork for us to kind of go forward. And I'm really honored that at the time I was still working for the state of Maryland, and our agency, the Maryland State Archives, was one of the seats, as well as the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture, for which I served. And at that time, then Chair Reverend Tamara England Wilson held the seat, and we were really excited about joining this commission, which was established through House Bill 307. And in that legislation, we were charged with holding public hearings and researching cases of racially motivated lynchings across the state of Maryland. When we first started the commission, I believe that we were at like 39 or 40 lynchings. We have now discovered, at least through documentation, 44 incidents of lynchings in our state. And, we know that it will be impossible to really cover those incidents that were not documented. But we are doing our best job to work with communities across the state where we have identified incidents of lynchings in 18 counties. And we are actually coming towards the close of wrapping up our public hearings. As I stated, we were established in 2019. And the plan was for us to be in existence for 3 years. That's how the bill was written at the time. But of course, that work just cannot be done as quickly during the pandemic. And recognizing the need to build relationships with the community, we had to do a lot of legwork.
Excuse me, Maya, I don't mean to interrupt. I did get a message. Is it possible to put your presentation in presentation mode? I think
I think from my end, it's in presentation mode, but I can't see. Let me
see what someone said. The slides aren't advancing on our end, so it's still.
Really? I'm so sorry.
No problem.
Is it right now, the slide that I have on is history and connection with youth?
No, we see we see the original slide, the first slide, and then the 4 slides on the end. Is it, so do you have it with the, let me see.
Can you see that? I just hit something else.
No, I don't know why it's not moving
It
on.
might be a split view. Like somebody mentioned, if you have 2 monitors.
No, I only have just the one. I'm not at my normal desk. I'm just on a laptop.
Can so can you hit from beginning? Can you go to the beginning?
Yeah, I can see your cursor moving.
Yeah, I see your cursor moving, but the presentation is not.
I wonder if I hit escape. And if I just, can you see it from this way?
Yes, we can see it. What about if you hit, do you see, okay. Okay, I mean, it's advancing there, but if you, at the top where it says from beginning, do you see that on your end? Or,
Yeah.
okay, hit that and see.
Can you see that?
No.
I think it opened another window. Maybe that the bottom right present. Yeah.
Slideshow. Can you see that?
I think it did another window again because it goes gray at the top. Let's see.
Okay, I'm sorry. So what I'll do, just to kind of be in tune with the time, I can just show it from this screen, and I'm sorry that
That's
it's not,
fine.
connecting. It's all right.
Thank you, Mom.
Yeah, so as we think about like history in connection with youth and the work of the Maryland Lynching Truth and Reconciliation, Dayvon and Chris really helped to lay the foundation of how we got to this point. And when I think about lynchings in Maryland, it really is, of course, the outgrowth of the end of the Civil War, when enslaved people in Maryland are emancipated. And this is not just the case for Maryland. This is a countrywide issue where you see a rise in lynchings across the country with people who are formerly enslaved and now freed. But what I will say is this rise in vigilante justice also arises at the same time that we start to see the formation of police departments. Knowing just my father being a police officer and who's now deceased, one of the objects in my house that was an aha moment for me was the formation of the Washington Metropolitan Police Department in 1862. And this is right on the heels of emancipation in the city of Washington, D.C. And thinking back to what juvenile justice looks like in terms of policing. And historically, as you know, before that, enslaved people are policed on plantations, small farms, in city dwellings, any place where they would have been enslaved. And just as a state, Maryland built its first prison in 1811. And the idea came into vogue that the state ultimately could save money by stopping children from embarking on a life of crime. Children will be separated from adults in places of detention and given a home, education, and training for a trade. And when I say this, like, that's a very loaded statement, because this wasn't always the case, and especially in the case of Black children in the state of Maryland. After the Civil War, reformatories for youth were established as private institutions segregated by race and gender. 4 ultimately became public reformatories: the House of Refuge, the House of Reformation, the Maryland Industrial School for Girls, and the Industrial Home for Colored Girls. And this is what separates the Black and the white. The House of Refuge and the Maryland Industrial School for Girls, those are the white institutions, and the House of Reformation and the Industrial Home for Colored Girls, those are for colored boys and girls, as they were referred to at that time. After the House of Refuge came the Maryland Industrial School for Girls, and that was incorporated in 1866 for the care, reformation, and instruction of such girls as are not admitted into either the House of Refuge, the Home of the Friendless, or the Children's Aid Society, but who need the care of some public reformatory institution. Initially, directors of the school were chosen from the membership or appointed by the mayor of Baltimore. The schools received no state aid, but its property was tax exempt. By 1870, however, the governor appointed 10 of 30 directors. The school was renamed the Female House of Refuge. So, in the establishment of these houses of refuge or reformation, White children were housed in these facilities as early as 1830, separate from the overall Maryland penitentiary system. Black children, Black boys, the House of Reformation was established in 1870, and the Female House of Refuge for Colored Girls, that was in 1882, my correction there. And so, as you can imagine, young Black boys and young Black girls are being placed in adult prisons, such as what Dayvon Love shared in his presentation earlier. And we talk about current systems, but this is a historic issue. And it's a common thread into the present. So if you want to know, we think about these things historically and like what happens to them. Well, they become state owned later on, and they are what we know today as schools such as the Charles Hickey School and the Cheltenham School, detention center, youth detention center. I shouldn't even call it a school. And there's about 11 of these facilities across the state. And we think about how our juveniles in the African American community have been taken care of, whether it is through over policing, through enslaved labor. Is it the rise in police departments post Civil War? Is it the rise in lynchings? And I should say, Maryland, it had, in difference to states in the Deep South, actually has one of the smallest representations of young person who would have been lynched, but we do have one person, and in my mind, that's one person too many, who is a youth. And a lot of times, what we don't denote is what Dayvon mentioned in his presentation is the adultification of youth. And this is something that goes back not to just the 19th century, but also the 17th, 18th century, where Black youth are essentially made to be adults, whether that be through labor, whether that be through human trafficking, sex trafficking, as you think about the rate at which Black enslaved girls become mothers, a trend that continues outside of the Civil War and afterwards. And so we really like to go to our public hearings, preparing the communities that we meet in to actually hear the history, which is a very crucial part of the work that we do, is this truth of where we've come from and where we still are very much today. And I'm sorry, I hit something wrong just now, but public hearings. Our public hearings, as I shared with you earlier, are done in the 18 counties across the state, and we typically partner with different coalitions that have been formed through the Maryland Lynching Memorial Project, but we also work with other local community members who may have testimony to share, whether that be descendants or just community members that know the history of their community and are still dealing with the recourse of the impact on those communities. Many communities have been destroyed, or they have had to deal with years and decades of trauma that have been passed down through racial supremacy issues. These things don't just go away. It is really a challenge for us to really go in the direction of like fixing what's happening. But what the plan is out of these public hearings is that we can hear back from community members the recommendations for repair around issues related to what I think is juvenile justice, and try to build upon like the plan for repair. And of course, at the forefront of that is, people are like, what are you thinking? Are you thinking reparations and payouts? And of course, that should be one thing on the table, but there's a number of other things that we are receiving from different community members. And it varies from county to county, from person to person. But at the heart of this, we really like to center the descendants. And I'd like to think that even in terms of juvenile justice, we don't all get to be adults, but we all were a child at some point. And so we're all in a place to really sacrifice our time towards making sure that we do have justice for our youth. So I really want to implore you to think about our public hearings and like what that looks like. And time again, in the early days of our public hearings, when we first started to do them, we would have someone that would show up and say, oh, my brother was lynched in 1984, or my brother was killed by a police officer. And we see the rise in police brutality over time. We've seen it all throughout the pandemic, and we actually start to see increases now again. And so while our commission is not able to, make any, we can't investigate. We're not a legal entity. But what we can do is make that a part of our feedback to the General Assembly. And so for me, I don't serve, we have 3 committees that have been a part of the Maryland Lynching Truth and Reconciliation Commission. That has been research, logistics, and reconciliation. And as we wrap up these hearings, we are just now about to start to enter into the reconciliation phase. And that goes towards that feedback for the General Assembly and really making a huge impact by letting our General Assembly know what the concerns of the community are, but then also holding our General Assembly accountable to then put forth bills that will further protect Black people in the state of Maryland, and in particular, our juvenile community, because they are most impacted by this. As you all know, like, we all have eyes, that we know what's been going on for the last 3 years. And especially as you think about the rise in crime, the school dropout rates in our state, there's just such a huge impact. And we really have to think about the adultification, the sex trafficking that's going on right now. We really need to take heed. And so I implore everyone on this call to think of yourself. We are not exempt from working with people outside of those public hearings, but if there is feedback that you think we need to take to the General Assembly after today, please send them to the Maryland Lynching Truth and Reconciliation Commission. We do have a page on our website, which I can put in the chat for feedback from the community and the public, but we owe it to our youth to take a stand, and this is a great opportunity to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Maya, and thank you for sharing this information as far as the ties of the history of racial terror and lynching in our state and its connection to laws and policy that impact Black youth today. And also thank you for all the work that you're doing with the Maryland Lynching Truth and Reconciliation Commission. This was a long time coming. So thank you for being literally a modern day history maker. All right, so to our last speaker, and I see y'all moving and grooving in the chat. I appreciate it. So on to our next speaker, our last speaker of the hour, Mr. Eric Elston. Eric and Ford, excuse me. It's been a long day, y'all. I'm sorry. Originally from Virginia and a graduate of Hampton University with a BA in sociology in 1993. But from the looks of him, it looks like 2003 or 2023. He is a post-baccalaureate certificate in the nonprofit sector from UMBC, has more than 30 years of experience in the human services field in the Baltimore City metropolitan area. Eric is currently the executive director for Shiver Center at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, where he leads the Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation Framework. He is a national leader in TRHT in partnership with the American Association of Colleges and Universities, AAC-NU. In his role, Eric mentors new campuses who embrace the framework and provides training at AAC-NU annual institutes. Currently, he served as a member of Governor Westmore's transition team as a member of the Public Safety Subcommittee. Eric was also a member of the Maryland Juvenile Justice Reform Council and serves on the board of Watershed Public Charter School in Woodlawn. At UMBC, Eric is co-chair of the Inclusion Council and is a member of the Middle States Self-Study Acceleration Committee. He has also served as chair of the Maryland State Advisory Group, a division of the Governor's Office of Crime Prevention and Policy, for 2 years. Locally, Eric was chosen to serve on the Mayor Brandon Scott's Boys and Young Men of Color Cabinet and helped to develop a 3-year strategic plan to address unmet needs of youth from underserved communities. Ladies and gentlemen, and all that are in the room, Eric and Ford.
Good evening, everyone. Just a sound check. Want to make sure I'm good with sound. I'm good.
Perfect.
Okay. All right. So when we talk about truth, racial healing, and transformation, a framework that we've adopted at the Shriver Center at UMBC, we have a phrase that we say that we have to jettison the fallacy of a hierarchy of human value. So I'll repeat that. We have to jettison the fallacy of a hierarchy of human value. So what we are in need of is desperate need of is narrative change. So due to the disparities caused by how the youth in the legal system works and systems involve youth is often synonymous with Black and brown people. So they and we are being dehumanized by the language we use and when we speak about them and us. So I'm including myself because I'm a former young Black person, and racism is consistent in that the dehumanization impacts me in the same way. So we need to eliminate the words juvenile and delinquent and other deficit-based language we use when referencing young people. In the aftermath of the Freddie Gray murder, the Shriver Center at UMBC realized that we needed to conduct an internal audit of all of our programming to assess the ways in which we are perpetuating systems of oppression. Particularly the choice program, in our work with youth in the legal system, we needed to change our service delivery system. So what we did was we revisited and renewed our values and collaboratively developed an anti-racism statement that can be seen on the website for the Shriver Center. In some cases, we changed our words and our language. So when our staff and AmeriCorps members and mentors used to go out into the community to view or visit young people, we used to call that tracking. And when services ended, we used the term terminated. So now we use, services completed. And when we go into the community, we just say we're going into the community or we're conducting home visits. We also moved away from language such as successful and unsuccessful. So who are we to determine whether or not a young person is successful or unsuccessful? So now we just simply share the level that they were able to attain in our behavior system. Once services are completed, we just report out on, which tier or what level they were on. So our service culture historically was based on how police solve crimes. We had boards in our offices with youth names on them, a whole list, which was similar to those used by police to solve crimes. So what we discovered is that our model was founded in the late 80s and early 90s during an era which existed the myth of the super predator. And that at that time, that myth was prevalent, and basically it was a psychologist who said that young people who were born from crack addicted parents would maim, rape, and kill, and that they could not be rehabilitated. So knowing that our program was founded during that time, we made a conscious effort to, again, just revisit and audit all of our processes and make necessary change. It was a deficit-based model, and it was rooted in policing, and it was rooted in monitoring and surveillance of young people and how they move. So what we did was we made a shift and to give young people more agency in our program, and just the acknowledgement of the historical factors during which our program was rooted was important and significant. So we call this shift moving from monitoring to mentoring. We incorporated motivational interviewing into our services through an evidence-based framework, which was founded at UMBC by Dr. Roberto DiClemente, and we literally went from human GPS trackers to supporting youth and families with goal planning strategies, which is also GPS. So we like to say we went from, a more surveillance-based GPS to goal-based GPS. I am a former mentor myself from the Choice Program. I served right out of Hampton University in 1993. And that model, we saw young people between 3 and 5 times a day. We saw them, we did a school check to make sure that they were in school. We did an after school check, and then we did a curfew check in the evening. We've since scaled back tremendously with the Choice Program, and now we see them roughly about 3 times a week. And as they progress through the program and reach their self-identified goals, then that can be reduced to even once a week. So grounded in critical race theory, we understood that our premise is that racism is embedded in our systems because of the eras these policies were crafted and the actors that created them. So for this reason, we call on all organizations to reflect on their origin stories and reconcile their programming with their current values and best practices in youth development. So just today, I'm going to put the link in the chat, but just today, an article was published by the Sentencing Project that spoke about how the news media has been, let me see if I can get this in the chat here. The news media has been, complicit in how youth were being viewed. So some of the things that he talked about was that there's just been a disproportionate focus on crimes committed by youth. So all 6 local media outlets in Baltimore, but especially TV and news stations, and particularly Fox 45, highlighted crimes by young people far out of proportion with their current arrest rates. Also, misleading representation of youth crime trends was noted as a factor. Whereas the availability of data on youth offending rates in Baltimore show a mix of trends, most of them were favorable. All 6 local media outlets repeated and asserted a recent spike in youth crime and violence. I'll just note one other point, and from this article that you can read yourselves, but Fox 45, relative to other news outlets, was much more likely to air sensationalized coverage highlighting youth crime incidents and perceived leniency in the justice system. So each of the problems that I just described were in order of magnitude more intense on Fox 45. On that station, viewers were presented with a steady stream of often lengthy stories offering graphic footage of youth crime incidents, as well as a sharp, fear-inducing rhetoric from select victims, witnesses, experts, and community residents. So what's imperative, and one of the main points that I want to stress here is that there's just a dehumanization of youth involved in the legal system, and youth of color are disproportionately involved in the legal system. So what that means is that there are these false narratives about young people that is impacting policy, and even in some cases, caused the reversal of some of the many gains that were made in 2022 when the Juvenile Justice Reform Act was passed. So just last year, a bill was passed, I believe 814, which reversed some of the progress that we had made in working with some of the policies and laws in Maryland with establishing a floor, meaning a minimum age that youth could be involved with DJS. Also, a cap on the length of time a young person could be on probation. And then, of course, as Dayvon spoke about, we had on the as part of our advocacy agendas to eliminate the youth charged as adults, but that has become a lightning rod lately, and I'm happy to hear that we're going to address that again in the upcoming session. So with that being said, I want to show a brief video that we work with young people in our program and a youth media company called Youth as Resources. We work with them to create a video advising young people or advising advocates on how to talk about to and about youth in general. So let me see if I can get this to work here. Actually, let me stop. Just give me a second here. I'm sorry, I lost my page that I was on. So I'll hold off on, I'll get to it. Maybe I can come back to it when we have some questions and have it queued up and ready. But that pretty much concludes my presentation. But I really just wanted to talk about all of the misinformation that has been put out there by young people. Recently, I wanted to share this article from the Sentencing Project that just came out this morning. And I also wanted to talk about the Shriver Center's journey in an audit that we took throughout all of our programs in an effort to make our programs more equitable and understanding the history in which those programs were created. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ford. And maybe you can share the video or the link to in the chat, and we can
I'll do that.
play it. Yeah, in culmination to this program. Thank you for all the work that you're doing on you're doing and have done on a city and statewide policy level. It is now 7:24, and I will say this, every time I go to like a really good program and I have a question, I'm always like, in my seat when the moderator is like, okay, I just have 5 of my questions and then we'll get to y'all. And I'm like, hurry up. So with that being said, I'm going to pass the mic to our awesome director of programs, Sabria Hassan, but I do want to give a personal thank you to all of the panelists and all the work that you're doing around yes, around especially the folks in the room around historic preservation, right? And how you are you centering Black history in our state, which is so needed and critical, but also how your work is being used as tools of advocacy, right, to improve the lives of Black people today. And again, I always say that, this is going to have a ripple effect generationally. So thank you. And to Eric and Dayvon, thank you for the current work that you're doing around legislation and advocacy and social change and protecting Black young people in our state. So on to Sabria, who will lead the Q&A and close this out. Thank you. And thank you all for being here. I see everyone in the room. Some folks I know, some folks I don't, but thank you. You're all a part of the family.
Well, thank you. And let's give a virtual round of applause, of course, to all of our presenters and also to Director Johnson for her amazing moderation skills. Thank you so much for all of the work that you do. And you all should know that this program is actually the brainchild of Director Johnson. She was really adamant about it. I said, hey, Director Johnson, that's the week of Kwanzaa and we got a lot going on. And she said, let's just make sure we get it in there. So I'm glad that she was persistent, and this was an amazing program. So as we are moving towards closing out, I want to make sure that we address all of the audience members and any questions that they may have. I know some questions were asked and sent directly to panelists, but Chris, I know there was a question around Crownsville, and were you able to answer? So for the studies being done on historical incarceration entry points in Maryland, Will those studies also include Black individuals in Maryland who were criminalized and committed to institutions such as the historic Crownsville State Hospital?
Yes, thank you, Sabrina. Yeah, it absolutely will. What we're trying to do, along the lines of what we did with the Legacy of Slavery program, is that we're I'm going to say indiscriminately because that's our topic, trying to mine every single record that we find in there. And so, in other words, we're not trying to find specifically this, specifically that, specifically something else. We're getting all of it. And so, and after we have it all contained in a searchable database, then it's for targeted persons such as an Eric Ford or Dayvon Love, who might look at it to see, well, this is what I'm trying to look for. This is the type of examples I'm trying to find. Or with Maya over at Riversdale, these are the individuals I want to know if there's descendants or ancestors or family members of with these last names, surnames who are incorporated in that. And certainly anyone who has been sent to Crownsville, if it's listed in there, then that's something that we would make those persons who are certainly engaged in that research right now, make them aware of, and see if they have a volunteer or an intern or what have you, who would want to look further into that individual's life and what happened to them. And one other thing that we're looking at, which we're very excited about, but of course it takes time, it takes money, it takes resources, is within many of the people who were incarcerated in the Maryland Penitentiary Project, sort of along the lines of what the laws were that I said earlier, and all the different things that the different panelists have said today, is that there are different organizations, one could even say it's our state, that specifically were hiring or benefiting from the work of imprisoned individuals. And so we have a subset of a chart that we're developing, which is of those organizations that actually were benefiting from the work of people who were in the Maryland Penitentiary. And just to see when do they exist, who are the people who were the owners, the movers or shakers of these individuals, and how many people did they actually hire and or one could say hired loosely, but engaged to do the work for them, by which they were profiting. And also the president was profiting as well.
Thank you, Chris. And I see that there was another question in regards to any connection between heirs property, which I particularly think is a form of racial terror, but that's a whole nother program, and the Orphans Court. It says that the Orphans Court is also in charge of issues of heirs property. And is there any particular connection between the two?
Now, I always say, I have my gut, which is that probably, but I haven't specifically studied it. So I can't say with any authenticity, yes, it's happened. I would suspect it's happening because I think to some degree, we all have to remember that at the end of the day, it's a person. It's somebody who's pressing the button, telling somebody else to do something, putting something in place or not putting something in place. So taking that into account, there certainly is a possibility that someone may say, oh my gosh, this family is a very, very well-to-do African-American family, and they are going to, this is just a hypothetical, and they may take over some aspects of our county if we let them. Now that the matriarch or the patriarch has died, let me see how challenging I can make this inheritance project, because this process, because I just don't really want that. And somebody else may be like, oh, I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of this family. We're going to move this through as smoothly as possible. Now, again, I haven't studied that, but again, we're talking about people at the end of the day. And so whatever that individual who's whatever says yes or no is ultimately up to them and how things move forward.
Thank you, Chris. And moving right along, there were some questions that came over to Dayvon. They were answered. Dayvon, did you want to, I know the answers came to the Terracan and the host, but did you want to just speak on that briefly?
Yeah, just to reiterate, particularly the question around like quotas and beds, I think much of the conversation around mass incarceration is focused on some of the financial incentives that institutions may have with incarceration. And one of the things I want to add is that there's an additional component to it that I think is often missing from that part of the conversation, which is there are political benefits to a constituency, particularly in more of the suburban parts of our nation. The Democratic Party traditionally has looked at urban cities and majority Black jurisdictions as its base. What has happened is over the past few years, the Democratic Party has looked to the more multicultural suburbs, folks that were formerly Republicans but are anti-Trump. So Democrats have been moving to that being one of their base constituencies instead of Black folks. And one element of that constituency's kind of general sensibilities is around issues of crime, tough on crime, over incarceration. So that in many ways serves as a political benefit to those, I mentioned some of the prosecutors around the state. They have a political incentive to deliver on those policies because they represent constituencies who that matches their beliefs.
Okay. Ooh, it's getting deep in here. Okay, so there was a question that came from James, and it was to any of the speakers, and it asked, do any of the speakers think the effort to organize to advance political and legislative agendas for African Americans would benefit from the United Census Bureau counting the descendants of the freedmen ethnic group? That's one part. If so, in what ways could counting the descendants of the freedmen help? If it doesn't, why not? And also, how can a Juneteenth national holiday be employed to further the organization of the descendants of the freedmen? So that's open. If there's anyone who has a particular interest or answer for James, please feel free to answer.
I guess I'm slightly confused. I don't know if he's meaning like freedmen, like post-Civil War, Maryland emancipation, but if that is the question that he's focusing on, there was a census taken after the Civil War that is identified as a series at the Maryland State Archives called the Slave Statistics. And there was a commissioner of slave statistics for every county in the state of Maryland. The challenge with that is what survives. Because as you know, like with transfer of records from county to county, not everything always shows up. I believe there's about maybe 8 to 10 that are still available at the Maryland State Archives. And I know at one point there was a reference to a Charles County slave statistic that was found, I think, at like Georgetown University or another repository. And so, it wasn't incomplete during the time period, but it's incomplete as it stands now because we haven't identified where all of those exist. So I think it would kind of pose a challenge. And the reason that was established was to really offer pretty much, money for slaveholders who were looking to be compensated for the loss of enslaved labor. So a count was taken and there was a commissioner of slave statistics that was taken, but it's just a matter of being able to pull all that data together, and data does drive change in many ways. So if that's the question that you were asking, that's my response to that.
And James, if you're still here, please feel free to let us know if that answers the question or if we can expand any further. And while you're doing that, I'll move on to a question from Matt that asks, would one of the panelists explain what the stated policy goals of a juvenile criminal systems are under Maryland law? I assume it is in somehow to acknowledge it is natural and expected that youngsters, as they grow, make mistakes and to help them meet obligations of adulthood in a more mature way. Is the main harm of the juvenile justice system the stigma of criminality? Is there data showing the number of kids in the juvenile system who currently go on to spend time in the adult system? So that was a loaded question. And if I need to break it down, just let me know. But if anyone is interested in tackling that, please feel free.
Yeah, I can jump into that. So a few things. One, the stated design of the juvenile justice system is so that it is not the adult system, meaning that it is supposed to be more preventative and proactive as it relates to dealing with the people that come into the system. So even some of the terms that are used, right, as opposed to being charged or sentenced, it's adjudicated, like they're different words even that are used when a person goes through the juvenile justice system, and that young people in the juvenile justice system, the stated design is that they're entitled to services, right? They're entitled to supports in ways that a person who's incarcerated in the adult system is not entitled to, right? So that stated difference is important in understanding how the state sees its responsibility to the people in those systems, right? Now, one of the challenges, so those of us that have worked in many of those public systems, whether it's like social services, public education, and Department of Juvenile Services, what tends to happen is many of those institutions, I think, from my vantage point, many of them are the most neglected of the agencies of our government, right? So if you know people who are in the foster care system or child welfare, right, we know some of the horrors of people who actually end up having to be in those systems. So in many respects, even though the stated design of the juvenile justice system is supposed to be more humane, kind of, and for those of us that, like, ultimately we don't want to have to use prisons for anything, right? Prisons of any sort should be the last resort for anything and anybody. But if the stated design is that it is supposed to be more supportive and have more obligations to the people in the system, talking about the juvenile justice system, but it is neglected, then what has happened is that particularly Department of Juvenile Services, over many years, the infrastructure to do that very basic job has been hampered. Now, I would say over the past couple of years, particularly under this newest secretary, who is also under attack by the same media, Sinclair Broadcasting and the like, that under this secretary, there are renewed attempts to outsource many of the functions of the Department of Juvenile Services to the community, so that the community is actually more involved in helping to divert young people who are in the system. Because the goal is, if they're in the system at all, you want them to be there as short amount of time as possible, right? And you want, community interventions to be the primary way that young people are dealt with. So current leadership, Department of Juvenile Services, I think, recognizes that and is moving in that direction. Again, what I want to reiterate, though, is that unfortunately, when we talk about like the constituencies that we're dealing with who are interested in the tough war on crime policy, even though juvenile justice system is supposed to be more supportive, it actually takes political will, right, to even put in a secretary who has that vision of what the Department of Juvenile Services should be. What the conservative right wing would want is a secretary who is more punitive, that would treat the juvenile system like the adult system, right? So that's one of the, so I hope that addresses the question. I think there's the stated design that is different than the adult system. There's the neglect that I think has made it ineffective. And then there's the work that needs to be done to put leadership that recognizes that distinction is important and how to treat the people that are in it.
Thank you, Dayvon. So I am trying to go through just to make sure. Well, Chris, I know there was the question from the beginning of with your presentation and your slides. There are some folks who are interested in receiving a copy for themselves. We didn't want to say yes or no, but if you are able to share with folks, we can either, if it's available, we can send it after the presentation, or perhaps it's not available to share, and that is also fine.
I can get it to you. It's all available on the Archives of Maryland, but it's not as easy to get to. I mean, we're actually picking and pulling and making it sort of easy for me to see and for you guys to see. But I can certainly get that to you at such time.
Thank you. And then James, I know, so the second part of that question, and I don't know if anyone is able to touch on this, about the Juneteenth holiday as a vehicle for organizing. Are there any thoughts on that?
I would just say quickly that having the opportunity to do things like this, I think, talking about the connection between the historical narratives of people of African descent, how those narratives have driven policies that have impacted our community, and drawing those parallels to today. I think it would be, a good way to use Juneteenth.
Awesome.
I always want to remind people that in Maryland is November 1st, 1864, which we celebrate here as being Emancipation Day for Maryland. And many times there's many celebrations around the state. And we had the big one with the rededication of the Banneker-Douglass-Tubman Museum. So I think that certainly any occasion that you want to use as being a stepping off point to fundraise and organize, one should do it. And many times an occasion is easier to get people's head around it. But I just always want to remind people, as far as Maryland goes, it's November 1st, 1864.
May I
Of
offer something?
course.
I'm looking at the questions in the chat, and we decided to do this program per the recommendation of Dayvon, who said you need to do it before legislative session. So we know our museum, we know our marching orders around amplifying particularly the histories that impact Black youth today, right? So with the legislative session coming up and kind of looking at the questions in the room, what, and I know we're coming up to the end of the program, what is our call to action? And we're going into 2025, what's our call to action?
And then just to piggyback off of that, Shadell, one of the last questions I was going to present was around juvenile justice outsources to community, and if there's funding and resources to support that movement, and where does that funding come from? And the idea of funding, can very much go hand in hand with a call to action. So I just wanted to add that and make sure that we got that answer. That we added, or we were able to ask that question. So I'll hand the mic over to the panelists who wanted to perhaps discuss any calls for action.
I'll start with the last question, and then the question about the call to action from Director Johnson. So the Secretary is launching something called Safer, Stronger Together, where they've convened community action boards from folks in Salisbury, folks in East Baltimore, folks in Hagerstown. But the idea of, and what those boards will be allowed to do is to provide funding to community-based organizations to work with young people that have come in contact with the juvenile justice system or some of the other, the health, Department of Social Services, Department of Corrections. So that's something that is one example of the outsourcing of some of the functions of the Department of Juvenile Services to the community that this secretary is piloting currently. In terms of the call to action, I'm going to give three things that I think are extremely important concrete calls to action. The first is to contact your legislator. So look up who your legislators are. There are 47 legislative districts. You all have 1 senator, 3 delegates. It's extremely important to contact each of those legislators. And it's one of those things that might feel small, right? But when legislators see, a number of people making the same request, they start to want to, then they, my experience in Annapolis is come to me and say, all right, Dayvon, what you want? Yeah, I see these people emailing me, so those emails are important. So emailing your elected officials, all 3 of your delegates and your state senator, to say this is an issue that is important. So that's one really specific call to action. The second is to contact the governor's office, right? Now while the legislature is responsible for passing laws, the governor, being both a Democrat and being, a political leader of the Democratic Party, the governor has a large agenda setting relationship to the legislature. And if the governor expresses support for something, it is more likely for the legislature to act on it. So I would say the second call to action would be to contact the governor's office. All of this is available online publicly. So it's not hard to find like how to, contact the governor's office to make those kind of requests. So I would say that's the second call to action. And then the third call to action, and, selfish plug, if you go to lbsbaltimore.com and you sign up for our newsletter, we put out action alerts where if a piece of legislation is moving through a committee, right? And we know that that it's going to be up for a vote in that committee, right? We send out action alerts to say, hey, this is going to be voted on today. We need you to call these legislators. We need you to email these elected officials. And in the action alert is literally a template. So you don't have to do all the original writing, right, of the action alert. We provide the information. So all you got to do is make the call or make the email to your elected official. So if you go to lbsbaltimore.com and you subscribe to our email list, you will get our action alerts so that in real time, folks will be able to make calls and send emails to their elected officials as we are advocating on these issues. And if you want to see our legislative agenda, that is also on our website. So if you want, so in the first and second call to action, writing about you care about this issue, if you go to our website and you look at our legislative agenda and you go to auto charging, it has a description of the issue there that you can include in the email that you send both to your elected officials and to the governor.
Dayvon is extremely thorough. Someone asked about a template, then they went to your website and it's right there. So that's awesome. Thank you all so much. What a fluid conversation. You know, when we plan these programs and, you know, everything is so structured, when we're just able to flow organically, it's just so refreshing. It allows me to learn. Like I stated, I am the mother of 2 Black boys, and I will not forget about my, you know, daughter. So when I think about the idea of just adultification, I remember just, you know, people would come up to us, my oldest son, who's now a sophomore at Morgan, and say, oh, you know, he's 10, he doesn't look his age. He looks maybe, but no, he's 10. Let's be very clear. He is 10 years old. Because subconsciously, I knew it was going on. You know, I read Raising Black Boys, Jawanza Kunjufu. You know, I was very aware. So, you know, this information, although sometimes subtle, kind of hits hard and hit home for me, again, as a mother raising Black boys in America. So thank you all so much. Thank you, Dayvon. Thank you, Maya and Chris, for the historical aspect. And of course, thank you, Eric, for your work that you're doing at the Choice Program and at University of Maryland, Baltimore County. Chris, Eric and I were supposed to connect some time ago when I was doing my work around disability and young people in Baltimore City. So Eric has been and continues to be a strong advocate for young people throughout the state. So thank you. Thank you all for coming. Chanel, thank you for your vision. Thank you for making this happen. Thank you for pushing me to make sure that it happened leading up to the legislative session. If we can, as it was stated, this program has been recorded and will be housed on our YouTube channel, which I believe was shared in the chat. If there are any questions that you may have, please feel free to contact us at the museum directly, and we'll hopefully, if we can't answer, we'll be able to put you in contact with some of the panelists here. Thank you again. Happy Hump Day. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and remember to lead with love. Take care. Good evening, everyone.
Thank you all.